can barely hold these. They're too heavy. My arm hurts now. Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to Kapowski Reads. And this is my March wrap up. I'm pretty shocked by the number of books that I managed to get through this month because I work in payroll. So March and April are my really busy months. And when I was taking note of what I had read, it turns out that I've read 21 books this month, which is more than I've read in a really long time. So maybe I need to be really busy in order to read lots? Maybe. There's so many books this month that I'm just gonna go through them in the order that I read them because I felt overwhelmed trying to think of another way to do it. So I'm going with that. If you've read any of these books, please let me know in the comments. The first book that I finished was Risio by Denise Mina. This was one of my reading Scottish books. I will add a link to my reading Scottish wrap up in the description. And in that video I will go into more detail about my Scottish books, so I won't drone on in this one, but I really enjoyed this book. It was teeny tiny. I read it really quickly and I gave it 4 stars. It was my first Denise Mina book and it definitely won't be my last. Next was The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante, and this was my book club book for February. I missed the meeting and I also hadn't read the book, so I read it a month late. And again, teeny tiny. As you can see at the start of March, I did not have any faith that I was going to get through that many books, so I was picking some of my smallest books. This book, it wasn't really for me. It's not the sort of book that I would have read if it wasn't a book club pick. I didn't really enjoy it. I ended up giving it 1 star and just moving on with my life. I then read an arc which was The Finalist by Joan Long, and the first half of this book was amazing. It was about a bunch of authors on an island trying to finish off a previous author's work, and that whole plot just sounded, I was so intrigued. And then murder ensues, as happens so often in books that I read, and that was when the book lost me. So first half, I would have given that book 4 stars for the first half and probably 1 for the second half because I really didn't enjoy the second half, so I ended up giving the book 2 stars overall. First half, excellent. I should have probably just stopped at halfway. I then made some very needed progress in my series. I read Fight and Flight by Scott Mayer, and this was book 4 in the Magic 2.0 series, which I am hoping to finish this year. This is a series that when I started it, I really loved it, and as the series has gone on, there are some things that I noticed in the earlier books that have just been popping up more and more, and so I'm enjoying the later books less and less. I am so close to the end of the series though, so I am gonna finish it because I want to see what happens. I did end up giving this book 2 stars. It was okay. It was an okay book. I then read Horrorstör by Grady Hendrix, and I know that that's not how you pronounce it because I did have a Swedish person tell me that the way that the accents are is pronounced in a different way to Horrorstör, but it's a play on a store that has horror, so I'm gonna go with that. And I wanted to read this back in October. It was a hopeful again for a book club. It didn't win because we couldn't find it anywhere. It was completely sold out, and I read the audiobook. And I didn't think that it would work so well in audio because I had seen the physical book and it sort of was set out like an IKEA catalogue, but I thought it worked so well as an audiobook. It had little sort of like doo-doo-doo-doo, and then somebody would describe a piece of furniture with like a hilarious name, and then the story would continue, and I really enjoyed it. It was super spooky, which I think expecting the book to be about, I don't know, something corporate and have no like supernatural goings on, but it did, and I really, really enjoyed it. And it was full of twists and turns, and I know I'm really late to the party with this book, as I am so often with books, but I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. Then it was time for a little bit of non-fiction, and I read 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff, which I didn't realise was non-fiction. And this book, again, teeny tiny, is actually 2 books. And in the first book, Helen is writing to a bookshop in Charing Cross Road, and it's just her letters to and from the bookshop, and it was just so charming and really sweet. And the second book was all about Helen travelling to London, and I didn't enjoy that book quite so much. I really liked the narrative in the letters, but it didn't really work for me so well in the second book. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I then read You Should See Me in a Crime by Leah Johnson. I only bought it at the start of the month, so I'm super proud of myself for reading it in the month in which I purchased it, and I'm going to give myself an applause for that. I loved this book. It's all about Liz trying to become prom queen so that she can get money to go to college, and I discussed this book in a reading vlog that I did earlier in the month. I'll pop that link in the description as well. I loved this book. It was heartwarming, it was charming, it made me laugh, and it made me cry. I gave it 5 stars. I then finally got around to reading The Young Team by Graeme Armstrong, which was one of my Scottish reads, and this again was at times heartwarming. It's very emotional to read, and I got so attached to the characters. I loved so many of them and only wanted good things for them, and I thought that this was an excellent narrative of real life for some people in Scotland, and it was eye-opening. I gave this 5 stars. I loved this book. It was quite upsetting at times, but I really enjoyed this book, and I can see me reading it again. I then read another non-fiction, Watching Neighbours Twice a Day by Josh Widdicombe. I wasn't sure what to expect from this book because I do enjoy Josh Widdicombe as a comedian, but I wasn't sure what to expect from a book that was just about him talking about TV from the 90s. And it turns out that's something I very much want to read about. I think I'm only a little bit younger than Josh Widdicombe, so a lot of TV that I watched as a child, he watched as a child. So for me, it was just so nostalgic, and I had forgotten how much I enjoyed programs like Gladiators. But to read a book entirely about TV that I used to love, it was great. And who knew that that's something I would want to read about? I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. Then there was Empress and Anaya by Candice Carty-Williams, and this was a super fun Freaky Friday style body swap book about 2 young girls in London, one from a privileged background and one really not. This was in my reading vlog, so I don't want to go on too much about how much I enjoyed it, but I really did enjoy it. It was short, it was sweet, it was heartwarming, and I think it had a really good underlying moral message for the reader. I got quite a lot out of it despite not being the target audience in any way. I gave this 3 stars. I then read Educated by Tara Westover, which was my March book club book. So I'm back up to date, and this again was in my reading vlog, but I did not enjoy this book at all. Unfortunately, it just really wasn't for me. I gave it 1 star, and I'm moving on with my life. I treated myself to an adorable little rom-com called Call Me Maybe by Cara Bastone. It was a sweet little romance that started over the phone to tech support. I gave it 3 stars. It gave me the warm and fuzzies, which was what I was looking for from this book. I then had my Read Christie 2022 pick for March, which was After the Funeral by Agatha Christie. I don't think I had read this book before. I'd seen the adaptation and I did remember the twist. So I gave this book 3 stars, and I wondered if I would have enjoyed it more if I didn't remember the twist. It's so rare for me to actually remember what happens in an Agatha Christie because I read them so often and I watch the adaptations. I do an annual rewatch, so usually the plots are kind of mixed up in my head, so when I do reread a book, it's kind of like reading it for the first time because I never remember what's going to happen, but I did remember this one. It is a fun book and it is a very well done book, and had I not remembered the huge plot point, then I think I would have given this 4 stars, but because I remembered it and it was a high 3. It was really good, it was enjoyable. I'll read it again, I'm sure. I had a 24-hour readathon this month as well, which I do every month over on Instagram with some friends, and I got through 2 books in my 24 hours, both of which were Scottish reads because I just felt like reading Scottish books in that weekend. The first book I read was Vicky, Romeo plus Joolz by Eli Percy. Eli Percy is the author of Duckfeet, which was my favourite book of last year. So when I saw this book in category is books, when I was through in Glasgow, I just had to buy it. And I'm so glad I did because I really enjoyed this book. It was so nostalgic and it was a beautiful romance. I love romance. I love nostalgia. I gave it 4 stars. I also managed to read and finish Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Weird Sisters by Olga Wojtas. This was an arc, so I received this a little bit earlier because it only came out this month, and I really enjoyed this book. This is book 3 of the series. By now I'm really into it. Shona, super smart but super lacking in common sense, which I think is what makes this series really hilarious. I think that's what makes it so funny for me, is somebody being so smart and then having like no sense of self-preservation or thinking before she speaks. This was set during the time of Macbeth, and it was really, really fun just seeing all of the characters that I knew of. I haven't actually read Macbeth. All of my references for Macbeth come from The Simpsons. Now, come from The Simpsons and this book. I'm probably going to have to read Macbeth at some point, but I thought this book was fun, it was silly, and it was really enjoyable to read. I gave it 4 stars. I then read book 5 in the Magic 2.0 series, Out of Spite, Out of Mind by Scott Mayer. And previously I hadn't been enjoying this series too much because of the lack of female characters. Of the main characters, 2 of them are women, and they're the same women in that they are an older and a younger version of the same person. So it was sort of like there was a distinct lack, I felt, of a variety of characters. And in this book there were a lot of Brits. Previously we had Brit the Elder, Brit the Younger, but there's another glitch that happens resulting in multiple Brits showing up. And while I had hoped for a bit more female representation, I wasn't really digging Brit as a character. I don't find her overly likeable, charming. Again, the same goes for the male characters too though. So this book didn't really do it for me, and I hoped that it would, because this book promised to give me a lot more female representation, which is what I feel that the series has been lacking. But it didn't really work for me. I gave this book another 2 stars, and I think that now, with this being book 5, I think that I have given the last 3 books of this series 2 stars, which is not a good sign. I do only have 1 book left in this series, which I think is the Vexed Generation. I think that's what it's called. So I'm gonna finish the series, but I'm not going in with high hopes for the last book. Another slightly disappointing read, I swear it gets better, was The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, which was one of my most anticipated reads of 2022, because this book was about the 11 days that Agatha Christie went missing, because nobody knows what happens. So it's a fictional narrative of those events. And this book was tying in that disappearance with the fictional version of Agatha Christie's husband's mistress. And I was really looking forward to that. But this book focused more on the mistress than the disappearance. And I was here for the disappearance. I was hoping that it was going to be, I was hoping they were secret lovers. That's what I wanted. Spoiler, they were not secret lovers. That's what I kind of hoped. Or I at least hoped for there to be some sort of link. But this book was about 80% Nan and her history, and it basically was historical fiction. And I kind of felt a little bit like I had been tricked into reading a book. I'd been promised a moving tale of the two women, and I got a story about a mistress that didn't exist, and that's not what I wanted to read. I wanted to read about the disappearance, and I didn't really enjoy a lot of Nan's story. I felt a bit disappointed by this book. I did give it 3 stars because it was well written. I gave myself a reread of 1984 by George Orwell. I hadn't read 1984 in a really long time, probably about 15 years, and I was a bit nervous about rereading it in case it maybe I didn't love it quite as much, but I shouldn't have worried because I really enjoyed it, and I still gave it 4 stars. I just think there's something so creepy about 1984. It's, you know, where my love of dystopia came from, like so many other people. I just find it so, like, it could happen, and I think that that's what makes it so scary. But I enjoyed it. I probably won't wait quite so long before the next reread of it though. After my severe disappointment of The Christie Affair, I decided to put myself in a position where I could be even more disappointed about people taking Agatha Christie's name. But I shouldn't have been so worried because I read The Killings at Kingfisher Hill by Sophie Hannah. This is an Hercule Poirot book. Sophie Hannah has written, I think this is the 4th book. She's written Poirot books. All, you know, the Agatha Christie estate have approved her writing. I have read a Sophie Hannah book before. I can't remember the title of it, but I gave it 5 stars. It was a thriller, it was creepy, it was twisty, I loved it. So when I saw that Sophie Hannah had basically picked up the reins of writing Poirot books, I was kind of excited, but I was also quite apprehensive, and I really enjoyed this book. It just sort of plopped in near the start of when we knew Poirot, pre-World War II, and there's murder in a very opulent housing estate, and it was full of the expected twists and turns, and Poirot was just, I think this was just a beautiful homage to Agatha Christie. I'm a huge fan of Agatha Christie books, which was why I was so nervous to read this, because if I didn't like this, I was going to be so upset because, well, it's Poirot. I love Poirot, and I did love this book. It felt a bit more modern, despite still being set in the 1930s, but I think that that's just something that's going to come naturally when a book is written in modern day. So I approve. Sophie Hannah doesn't care if I approve, but I approve of her writing Poirot. I'm sure that means absolutely nothing to her, but I really enjoyed this book, and I have checked my library and they do have the other 3. So I'm going to borrow them and read the other 3 books that she's written, because this one was brilliant. I gave it 4 stars. I did not see it coming, which is what I love in an Agatha Christie. So it was very good for me to see that that has been carried on in the Sophie Hannah versions of Poirot. My next read was a bit disappointing. It was an arc called How to Murder a Boy Band by Jason Roach. I just thought it was a really interesting concept of somebody, you know, they'd had enough of boy bands and their influence, so they were going to take matters into their own hand. The first half was really, really slow. I didn't like any of the characters, although Caroline was nice, but the book was pretty full of derogatory terms towards women and people of different ethnicities that it made for some quite uncomfortable reading. The second half of this book was quite violent, but obviously in this sort of book I expected there to be violence, but it felt like there was unnecessary violence and sexual assault, which nope, don't want to read a book with that. I gave it 1 star, really not for me. I thought it was going in the sort of American Psycho direction. I didn't enjoy this book, and I'm hopeful that I can just forget about it going forward. That should have been my last book of March, but I refuse to end the month on a 1-star read. I won't do it. So I decided that I was going to do a reread that I've been planning for a while early. I read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. My partner bought me the collection. I think there's 15 books in it, just the teeny tiny ones. I haven't read these since I was maybe 10, so 25 years ago. I do have them all on ebook, but this was a series I wanted to read in physical form, and I picked up the first one to give it a reread, and it's as magical and as wonderful as I remember. I really enjoyed rereading this. I gave it 4 stars. I've sort of fallen back in love with The Wizard of Oz, and I'm really excited to continue reading or rereading the series. I think it's going to keep me busy for a while because there's a lot of them, and I feel much better ending the month on a reread and a 4-star, because I hate when I don't like a book. I feel really bad because somebody spent time writing that book and here I am not enjoying it, and I'm sure they don't care, but I still feel quite bad. So those are all of my reads of March. Way more than I thought there would be. My book recommendation of the month that nobody asked for is You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. It was heartwarming, it was lovely. I have absolutely nothing but good things to say about this book. I highly recommend it. I would love to know what your favourite book of the month was. So moving on to my reading intentions for April, I have got a really busy work month in April. I thought that about March too, and I managed to read 21 books, so who knows what April's going to bring. So that I don't get stressed, I'm just going to set myself 3 reading goals, which are This Wicked Fate by Kaylin Bayron, which is an advanced reader's copy. The book is out in June. I pre-ordered it back in August, so I'm ridiculously excited to pick up where This Poison Heart left me. I also plan to read Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart, which comes out in the middle of April. Again, this is a pre-order and I'm so excited about it. I really enjoyed Shaggy Bane, so I'm very much looking forward to reading Young Mungo. And I kind of want to treat myself to a little bit of non-fiction. So I plan to read A is for Arsenic by Catherine Harkup, which is all about the poisons used in Agatha Christie books. If you like this video, like, and I post videos every Sunday, so if you want to see those, feel free to subscribe. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye!